Look down at your own hand right now. Whatever shade you're looking at, here's something that might genuinely surprise you. Every human being on Earth, every single one of the 8 billion people alive today, descended from ancestors who were all roughly the same color. Not white, not black, one shared shade, universal, no exceptions. So somewhere between then and now, that single color split into a spectrum wide enough to paint an entire species in 1,000 different tones. And the answer to why isn't really about culture or geography in the way you'd assume, or anything close to what most people guess. It's about sunlight. It's about a molecule inside your skin fighting a war it's been losing and winning at the same time for 2 million years. Here's where it gets interesting though. Go back far enough, past every civilization, past every migration you've ever heard about, and you land on something unexpected. Our earliest ancestors probably weren't dark-skinned at all in the way you're picturing right now. They were covered in fur like every other great ape alive today, and underneath all that hair their actual skin was almost certainly pale. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, have pale skin hidden under thick black hair this very second. Part a chimp's fur and you'll find skin the color of someone who has spent zero time in the sun. So if our ancestors started out pale under a coat of hair, something had to happen for that to flip completely. Something big enough to rewrite the color of an entire species. That something was losing the fur. Somewhere around 1 to 2 million years ago, early humans in East Africa started shedding their body hair, and nobody knows the exact trigger. But the leading explanation ties back to something we've already talked about before: endurance. Naked skin sweats far more efficiently than skin buried under fur, and a species that had just discovered it could outwalk, outrun, and outlast almost anything on the savanna needed a cooling system that actually worked under equatorial heat. But losing your fur under the African sun creates a brand new problem, and it's not sunburn like you'd expect. It's something stranger, it's folate. Because here's what nobody tells you about sunlight: it doesn't just tan your skin, it can quietly destroy a vitamin your body desperately needs called folate. Folate is essential for producing healthy sperm, and even more critically, it's essential for a developing fetus, particularly for something called the neural tube, which forms the earliest structure of the brain and spinal cord. Without enough folate circulating in the blood, birth defects and reproductive failure climb sharply, and ultraviolet radiation breaks folate down almost immediately once bare skin is exposed to it. So imagine a group of newly hairless humans standing under the harshest sun on the planet, their reproductive success quietly dropping hour by hour, generation by generation, without any of them ever understanding why. Natural selection doesn't care about anything except who survives long enough to have healthy children. And any mutation that happened to produce more melanin, the pigment that darkens skin and blocks ultraviolet radiation like a built-in sunscreen, would have spread through that population fast. Not because it looked good, because it kept bloodlines alive. In 2004, a geneticist named Alan Rogers looked at a gene called MC1R across different human populations, the gene most directly responsible for controlling melanin production, and traced how long ago it locked into the version that produces dark skin. His estimate landed somewhere between 1.2 and 1.7 million years ago. Sit with that number for a second. That means for well over 1 million years, every single human ancestor who ever lived had dark skin, not some of them, not just the ones near the equator. Every human being alive on Earth was dark-skinned, because every human being alive on Earth was living in Africa, under the exact same relentless sun that created the trait in the first place. For most of the human story, skin color variation as you know it today simply didn't exist yet. So here's the actual mystery, the one that takes some thinking to fully land. If every human on Earth was dark-skinned for over 1 million years, how did lighter skin ever show up at all? The answer starts around 70,000 years ago when small groups of humans began walking out of Africa into completely different environments. Northern Europe, Central Asia. Places where the sun sits low on the horizon for half the year, where cloud cover is constant, where the same intense ultraviolet radiation that once threatened folate now barely touches the ground at all. And that shift flips the entire problem on its head. Dark skin, so effective at blocking UV back in Africa, becomes a real liability somewhere with weak indirect sunlight, because your body needs a certain baseline of UV exposure to manufacture vitamin D inside your skin. And vitamin D is not optional. It controls calcium absorption, bone strength, and immune function. Too little of it for too long, especially across generations, causes rickets, weakened bones, and reduced fertility. So the exact trait that once saved lives near the equator started quietly working against survival the further north people wandered. Now something incredible happens once you actually look at the genetics behind lighter skin, because it turns out lighter skin isn't one single trait that evolved once and simply spread outward like a ripple. It evolved multiple separate times in different populations, using almost entirely different genes, converging on a similar outcome through completely different paths. Europeans owe much of their pale skin to variants in genes called SLC24A5 and SLC45A2. East Asian populations independently evolved lighter skin using a largely different set of genetic changes entirely. Two populations, thousands of miles apart with no contact, arrived at a strikingly similar solution to the exact same sunlight problem almost completely on their own. That's not one story repeating itself. That's the same evolutionary pressure writing two separate answers on two separate continents, without either one knowing the other existed. But here's the part that genuinely breaks most people's assumptions, the part that even surprised scientists once the hard evidence finally came in. The genetic variants responsible for very pale skin in Europeans appear to be shockingly recent, far more recent than almost anyone expected. Ancient DNA studies on skeletons recovered across Europe show that as recently as 8 to 10,000 years ago, many people living there still carried the older, darker-skinned version of these genes. In 2018, researchers extracted DNA from a nearly 10,000-year-old skeleton discovered in England, known as Cheddar Man, and the results landed almost exactly opposite of what most people expected walking in. Cheddar Man had strikingly dark skin, paired with strikingly blue eyes. A combination that feels backwards by modern assumptions but makes complete sense once you understand the actual timeline underneath it. Pale skin in Europe was never some ancient, deeply rooted trait passed down since the dawn of humanity. It's one of the newest visible features to appear on the human body, spreading widely only within roughly the last several thousand years, likely accelerated once agriculture reduced how much vitamin D people got from hunted meat and fish, making sun-derived vitamin D even more critical for survival than before. So think about what that actually means, because it's bigger than it first sounds. Skin color, the single trait that humans have used for centuries to sort each other into rigid categories, to build entire systems of hierarchy and prejudice around, turns out to be one of the most recent, most rapidly shifting, most genetically shallow features on the entire human body. It's controlled by a small handful of genes. It shifted dramatically within a few thousand years whenever populations moved into new light environments. It evolved independently more than once, through separate genetic roots, arriving at similar answers by coincidence rather than shared ancestry. Underneath the surface, two people with wildly different skin tones can be genetically closer to each other in almost every other way than two people who happen to share the exact same shade. Because skin color adapted to local sunlight so fast, and so independently, that it stopped being a reliable marker of deep ancestry almost as soon as it finished appearing. Every shade of human skin walking around today, every single one, is a variation on that same original theme, shaped by nothing more dramatic than how much sun your ancestors happened to stand under for the last several thousand generations. Move a population into weaker sunlight for a few thousand years, and their skin lightens. Move that same population back into intense sun for long enough, and eventually it darkens again, because the same genetic machinery that built this variation the first time never actually left the human genome. You are not looking at some fixed, ancient division between different kinds of humans. You're looking at one single adaptable system, still capable of shifting, still quietly tuned to sunlight, still writing the same evolutionary sentence it first started writing 2 million years ago on the plains of East Africa. Every human alive right now, every shade, every tone, is a live demonstration of exactly how fast biology can respond when survival genuinely depends on it. And if a trait this visible, this obvious, this argued about for centuries, turns out to be barely a few thousand years old in some of its most common forms, it raises an uncomfortable question about almost everything else we assume is ancient and fixed about human difference. Eye color, hair texture, even the basic shape of the human face.